The lab extraction. Dr. Emily Rourke had spent most of her adult life inside government laboratories, and on the night she disappeared, she followed the same routine she had repeated for years. She arrived at the remote Montana facility shortly after 10 p.m., signed in through 3 layers of biometric security, and walked the long metal corridor that led to Research Chamber C12. The hallway lights buzzed softly above her, flickering every few seconds in the way old fluorescent bulbs do, but she barely noticed. She was focused entirely on the newest prototype she was ordered to test, a quantum resonance core developed under a program whose official name was never spoken aloud. Inside the lab, cameras recorded every second with clinical precision. Emily set her thermos on the steel counter, opened her notebook, and began the calibration sequence. For hours, nothing unusual happened. The readings were stable. The core emitted a steady pulse of pale blue light. Every spike on her monitor had a logical explanation. It was the kind of quiet, meticulous work she preferred. No conversations, no distractions, no supervisors breathing down her neck. Then, at exactly 02:17 a.m., the first anomaly occurred. A faint vibration rolled beneath her feet, so light she thought she had imagined it. She stood still, waiting for a follow-up tremor that might indicate seismic activity, but the building remained perfectly silent. She exhaled, shook her head, and returned to her notes. 17 seconds later, the second vibration hit, this time stronger and sharper. The metal legs of her workstation gave off a dull ring. A set of instruments on the wall rattled. Even the overhead lights flickered in unison, as if responding to some invisible frequency. Emily stepped back from the resonance core and checked the facility status panel, but all systems showed normal. No power surge, no magnetic event, no reason for the vibrations. She walked toward the intercom to call Central Security, but stopped when she noticed the third anomaly. Objects around the lab had begun to float. Not dramatically, just a millimeter, maybe 2, but enough for the cameras to capture it. Paper clips, a pen near her computer, the corner of her notebook lifting ever so slightly off the table. The air itself felt charged, heavy, as if the room were filling with static from every direction at once. The resonance core brightened, then it dimmed, then it pulsed in a pattern she had never seen before. Emily took one cautious step back. She reached for the emergency shutdown switch, but her hand froze halfway. A deep, harmonic hum swelled through the chamber, not coming from the machine, not from the building, but from the air directly above her. She looked up. The ceiling was bending, not cracking, not breaking, bending, as though gravity had reversed direction and was pulling the reinforced metal upward into a widening circular shape. Within seconds, a perfectly silent distortion appeared. A dark sphere surrounded by rippling edges like heat waves rising off asphalt. The temperature dropped so sharply that vapor curled from Emily's breath. She tried to run. The cameras showed her turning toward the door, but the door didn't move. The magnetic locks had disengaged. The lights died. Every electronic device in the lab went dark at the same instant, leaving only the resonance core glowing dimly on the table. A windless force lifted Emily off the floor. Her feet scuffed against the tiles as she clawed at empty air, trying to grab anything she could. She screamed, but the microphones recorded no audio, not even static. As she rose higher, her body arched backward toward the distortion. Her hair lifted. Her arms shook. One of her shoes slipped off and dropped to the ground. The distortion expanded, swallowing the ceiling panels, the lighting fixtures, and finally Emily herself. Her body vanished into the sphere without a flash, without a sound, without a trace of physical damage to the surrounding structure. 3 seconds later, the distortion snapped shut. Power returned to the facility instantly. The lights flickered back on. The machines rebooted. The magnetic locks clicked open. When security finally reached Chamber C12, they found the lab in perfect order, except for Emily's notebook lying on the floor, its last page torn and burned along the edges in a pattern that analysts later described as consistent with exposure to an energy source not cataloged in known physics. Dr. Emily Rourke was never found. The official report states only 26 words. Subject extracted during unscheduled event. Cause unknown. Recovery impossible. Facility lockdown recommended until further notice. The Highway 93 vanishing Carl Henson had been driving freight trucks across the northern states for nearly 30 years, and during all that time he swore he had never seen anything on the road he couldn't explain. Storms, rock slides, avalanches, even tornado funnels that touched down dangerously close. He had stories for every mile of highway between Idaho and North Dakota. But the incident he reported on Highway 93, shortly after 3:12 a.m. on a cold October morning, was unlike anything he, or the authorities, had ever dealt with. The night was moonless and clear, the sky a blank sheet of black stretching endlessly in all directions. Carl was hauling a refrigerated trailer full of medical supplies toward Kalispell, cruising at a steady speed with nothing but static-filled radio talk to keep him awake. The nearest town was miles away. There were no other vehicles on the road. It was the kind of isolation long-haul drivers know well, a stretch of highway so empty that even the sound of your own engine starts to feel foreign. Then in the far distance, he saw a flash. Not lightning. It didn't come from the sky. It came from the road itself, like a white-blue pulse expanding outward from a single point on the asphalt. Carl squinted, leaning forward in his seat as he tried to understand what he was looking at. The flash didn't fade like a normal burst of light. Instead, it grew brighter, stretching upward into a tall, narrow column that shimmered with a metallic glow. At first, he thought it might be a road flare or some kind of emergency beacon, but the light was too clean, too cold, too perfectly vertical. As he slowed the truck, he realized something else, something that made his heart hammer against his ribs. A silver sedan was driving directly into the beam. The car must have been traveling at highway speed, but it did not brake. It did not swerve. It simply continued forward as though the driver either didn't see the column of light or didn't believe it was real. Carl lifted his CB radio mic. "Dispatch, this is Henson. You seeing anything strange on 93? Got some kind of..." He stopped speaking. The sedan entered the beam and the impossible happened. The vehicle didn't explode, didn't burn, didn't collide with anything. Instead, it dissolved, like a photograph burning itself away from the center outward. The headlights disappeared first, then the hood, then the roof, all swallowed by a shimmer of white-blue particles that rotated upward through the column like ash moving in reverse gravity. Within 2 seconds, the sedan was gone completely. Carl slammed the brakes. His truck fishtailed across the asphalt, tires screaming, trailer swaying dangerously behind him. When the vehicle skidded to a halt, the column of light still stood there, silent, motionless, stretching 30 feet into the air. The beam didn't illuminate the road like normal light. Instead, it cast a faint geometric pattern across the ground, shapes he couldn't make sense of, concentric circles, intersecting lines, shifting grids that seemed to rearrange themselves when he blinked. He opened the door to get a closer look, but the moment his boot touched the pavement, the sound around him changed. The crickets, the wind, even the hum of his truck's engine, all of it seemed to stretch as though time itself had thickened. The air felt heavier. His chest tightened. Then he heard it. A low, resonant tone rising from inside the beam. Not musical, not mechanical, something far older, deeper, like the distant echo of a whale call but distorted through metal. He staggered backward. Hell no, hell no. He climbed back into the truck and threw it into reverse, eyes locked on the column. The beam flickered, shrinking slightly. A ripple passed through it, bending the top as if an invisible hand had brushed against it. Then the light collapsed inward like a closing eye. Silence returned instantly. The geometric patterns vanished. The road was empty again. Carl kept reversing for nearly a full minute before forcing himself to stop. His hands shook uncontrollably as he dialed 911, trying to explain what he had seen. The dispatcher logged his call but marked it unstable due to stress. No other witnesses, no evidence, except there was evidence. When State Patrol arrived 40 minutes later, They found black scorch marks on the road in a perfect circle, the exact shape of the vanished beam. The pattern was too clean, too precise to be tire marks or fire damage. And in the center of the circle they found something stranger still. A metallic residue, thin as dust, shimmering faintly under the headlights like crushed glass mixed with mercury. Analysis later confirmed the residue contained compounds not present in any known automotive material. As for the sedan, it was never recovered. The driver, a 47-year-old school administrator from Missoula, was declared missing. His last phone signal had pinged 2 minutes before Carl's call, right at the center of Highway 93. The official report ended with a single statement. Vehicle did not depart roadway. Vehicle left observable space. The 3-minute blackout. The residents of Ridgway, Colorado always described their town the same way. Small, quiet, unimportant. The kind of place where nothing unusual ever happened. The population was barely 700. Most people worked at the lumber yard, the diner, or the county maintenance office. Nights were silent except for the occasional truck passing along the old mining road. But on the evening of November 14th, everything familiar about Ridgway collapsed into something none of them could explain. It began at 9:03 p.m., when every single light in town shut off at the exact same instant. Not flickered, shut off. Not dimmed, vanished. Street lamps, refrigerators, security systems, phones, cars, the LED sign above the high school gym, every electrical device died in a perfect synchronized blackout. The town had experienced outages before, but never like this. Residents stepped out onto their porches holding flashlights, confused, annoyed, calling to one another across the darkened streets. The sheriff radioed dispatch, but the radio emitted only static. A few people tried dialing 911, but their phones refused to turn on at all. The blackout lasted precisely 3 minutes. That amount of time was later confirmed through mechanical wristwatches and battery-powered kitchen timers, anything not dependent on the grid. 3 minutes. Not a second more, not a second less. But while the lights were out, something else happened. Something the government later denied, dismissed, and quietly buried in their reports. The sound began behind Pine Ridge Trail. It was low at first, almost too soft to hear, a deep, cycling hum like a distant turbine spinning far beneath the ground. Then it grew louder, richer, layered with harmonics that rose and fell in patterns too precise to be natural. People stepped into the street, shining their flashlights into the forest. The air vibrated, dogs barked uncontrollably, window glass trembled. Inside that pitch-black town, dozens of residents later told investigators the same thing. The stars disappeared. Not behind clouds, not behind smoke. They were simply gone. Black sky, no moon, no stars. Just a void above the town, darker than anything the human eye should be able to perceive. At 9:05 p.m., the hum suddenly intensified, so violently that several residents dropped to their knees. One man described it as like the air was being pulled upward. Another said he felt every bone in my ribcage vibrating. Then came the flash. A single burst of white-blue light erupted from behind Pine Ridge Trail, illuminating the entire town for less than half a second. The source of the light couldn't be identified. It was too bright, too sudden, and vanished before anyone could focus on it. But the glow left something behind. A vertical streak, thin and sharp, hanging in the air like a line drawn with a laser. The streak shimmered for a moment, then split into 2, then into 4, forming a shape like a collapsing doorway. People began to scream. When the power returned at 9:06 p.m., the hum stopped instantly. The stars returned. The streak of light vanished into nothing. But something in Ridgway had changed. A group of hikers, 5 adults who had been camping 2 miles up Pine Ridge Trail, were no longer reachable. Their campsite was found the next morning, tents intact, food still laid out, backpacks zipped, a fire pit half-lit and smoldering. But there was no sign of the hikers themselves. No footprints leading away. No struggle. No note. No bodies. The only physical trace was a scorched oval in the soil about 12 feet wide. The ground hardened into a glass-like texture that geologists later said required temperatures hotter than volcanic rock. State officials declared the hikers missing due to environmental disorientation. The residents of Ridgway called it a lie, and travelers passing through the town began to whisper a new name for Pine Ridge Trail, the 3-minute gap. What happened during Ridgway's blackout was never explained. The government's final statement claimed there was no measurable electromagnetic disturbance. But the residents know what they saw, and more importantly, what they didn't see. For 3 minutes, the sky above them was gone. The ranger station incident. The San Juan National Forest covered more than 1.8 million acres of rugged Colorado wilderness, and most of its rangers worked alone for long stretches, patrolling trails that twisted between canyons, lakes, and dense pine. Ranger Paul Merrick had spent 12 years stationed at Outpost 14, a small wooden structure perched on a ridge overlooking the northern basin. The outpost had no neighbors, no cell service, and only a single radio line connecting it to the regional command center 50 miles away. On the evening of August 22nd, Paul finished his patrol just before sunset. The sky was a deep orange, filtered through wildfire smoke drifting from another county. He filed his daily observations, locked the equipment cabinet, and heated a can of stew on the propane stove. It was a normal night, the kind he lived for, quiet, solitary, predictable. At 9:41 p.m., the regional command center received Paul's final transmission. His voice sounded calm at first. Outpost 14 to Region North, I'm seeing lights in the basin, not like campfires, more like hold on. A few seconds of silence. Then, they are moving. Copy, I've got movement in 3 separate points of light. They are lifting, they're off the ground. The dispatcher asked if he was observing helicopters or drones. Paul's answer was immediate. No rotor noise, no engine, nothing. They're just rising. The dispatcher requested visual confirmation but received no reply. Paul's microphone remained open, his breathing audible, slow, steady, but clearly focused on whatever he was seeing. Then he whispered something the recording technicians later played dozens of times. They see me. A static burst, a scrape of wood, the sound of Paul stepping back from the window. Then his voice rose sharply. Region North, I have Jesus. One of the lights is coming toward the station. It's too fast. The transmission ended mid-sentence. The dispatcher attempted to re-establish contact. No response. Another ranger team was dispatched immediately, but due to the rough terrain, it took them 90 minutes to reach the ridge. When they arrived, Outpost 14 was still intact. The stove was on. Paul's radio was active. His notebook lay open on the desk, pen resting across the page, but Ranger Merrick was gone. No footsteps in or out of the cabin, no signs of struggle, no animal attack indicators. Only one piece of evidence stood out. The metal hinges on the cabin door were bent outward, not inward, as though something extremely strong had pulled the door from the outside without touching the wood. The search team spread out across the basin, calling Paul's name for hours. At 2:06 a.m., they found something else instead. A circle of flattened grass approximately 37 feet wide, warm to the touch despite the cold mountain air. Radiation sensors registered a mild spike, nothing immediately dangerous, but unnatural for the elevation and environment. In the exact center of the circle, they found Paul's ranger hat, perfectly upright, undamaged, sitting on the ground as though someone had placed it there deliberately. When investigators reviewed the last radio transmission in detail, they enhanced the final moments of audio, the portion where Paul's voice cut out. What they discovered was a faint tone layered underneath the static. Not a voice, not wind. A harmonic frequency rising sharply, then dropping into silence the instant Paul disappeared. Analysis compared it to dozens of natural and mechanical sources. None matched. The official report filed by the U.S. Forest Service claimed Ranger Merrick likely wandered away from the outpost after experiencing disorientation brought on by smoke inhalation. The explanation satisfied no one, especially those who knew him. Paul was disciplined, experienced, and deeply familiar with the area. He would never have walked off into the dark without his gear. Unofficially, the search team gave the site a different name, the name whispered among rangers who patrolled the deep forests at night, the Light Basin. And to this day, Outpost 14 remains closed. No ranger has volunteered to staff it since the night Paul Merrick vanished into the silent glow. The airfield Echo, the decommissioned military airfield outside Tonopah, Nevada, had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades. The hangars were stripped, the runways cracked, and the control tower reduced to a bird sanctuary. Locals said the government moved operations to a more secretive location in the desert, but no one knew where or why. Most nights the old base sat silent, slowly eroding under wind and heat. But on June 11th, something woke it up. A team of 4 contractors, Jason Pike, Dale Hart, Emily Chavez, and Marcus Lane, were hired to survey the airfield for a possible commercial redevelopment project. Their job was simple: inspect the old structures, take measurements, and report any hazards. They arrived just before dusk, parking their truck near the collapsed fence line. Dale, the oldest of the group, muttered as they approached Hangar 3, "Feels like this place doesn't want us here." Emily laughed it off. "It's an empty airstrip in the middle of nowhere, Dale." But even she felt a tightness in the air she couldn't explain. Inside Hangar 3, the floor was coated in dust. Massive steel beams arched overhead, creaking under the slightest breeze. Jason walked ahead with the main flashlight, sweeping the beam across rusted equipment, shattered crates, and graffiti left by bored teenagers. Then Marcus noticed something no one else had: footprints. Not old ones, fresh ones. A single line of prints leading perfectly straight toward the back of the hangar. The dust around them was undisturbed. No other footprints entering or leaving. Just one set, as if someone had materialized in the center and walked deeper into the shadows. "Who the hell has been here?" Marcus whispered. Before anyone could answer, a sound rolled through the hangar, deep, metallic, and distant, like the groan of bending steel mixed with the thrum of turbine engines starting from underground. The flashlight flickered, the temperature dropped. The dust on the floor began to swirl in small spirals. Jason tightened his grip on the light. "Everybody stay close." At the back of the hangar, the footprints ended abruptly. They didn't turn, they didn't stop. They simply ended like the person had stepped off the world. Emily crouched to inspect the final print and froze. There was a vibration in the concrete, a steady rhythm, a pulse. Marcus, standing behind her, noticed the light shifting against the far wall. Not like a reflection or a flicker, more like a soft glow seeping through the wall itself. A vertical line of pale blue light stretched upward, only an inch wide but bright enough to cast faint shadows behind the group. Then the line widened. Not with a sound, not with force, just clean, silent expansion, splitting open the darkness like a zipper in reality. A rectangular doorway of pure light formed, humming with barely audible frequencies that made their bones ache. Emily stumbled back. "We need to go." Now, a presence stepped through the doorway. No details were clear. Its form was tall, slender, shimmering like heat distortion, humanoid but not consistent, edges bending, shifting, dissolving into other shapes as it moved. It didn't walk. It glided. Jason dropped the flashlight. The figure stopped exactly where the footprints had ended, as if that invisible walker had simply returned through the same doorway. The team backed toward the hangar entrance. The figure tilted its head, not curiously, but as if assessing them the way one might assess faulty equipment. Then the frequencies changed. The doorway pulsed. The glow intensified. Dust lifted off the ground in a perfect vertical column. Marcus was closest to the pulse. His feet slid forward against his will. He grabbed a steel beam, muscles straining, screaming for help. Dale lunged toward him, but the moment he stepped into the path of the column, his entire body froze mid-motion, rigid, suspended as though time tightened around him. Emily reached for Dale's arm, and that was when Marcus let go. His body lifted into the light, bending unnaturally, rising diagonally toward the open doorway. His mouth stretched in a soundless scream. The figure stepped aside, giving him a clear path, almost guiding him upward like a ritual offering. Jason yelled his name, but Marcus vanished into the doorway. Then the doorway snapped shut. The hangar went silent. Dale collapsed, gasping. Emily fell to her knees. Jason stood trembling, unable to process what he had seen. When they ran outside, the desert was quiet again. No glow, no sound, no footprints except their own. They drove straight to Tonopah Sheriff's office, hysterical and incoherent. Authorities searched the hangar for days. They found no doorway, no figure, no abnormal radiation. But they did find one thing. In the exact spot where the footprints had ended, they discovered a rectangular patch of concrete, perfectly smooth, glass-like, melted and resolidified into a texture no industrial furnace could create on site. The government seized all reports within hours. The official explanation: accidental disappearance in unstable structure. Case closed. But the contractors knew the truth. Marcus didn't vanish into the hangar. He was taken from it. The Orchard Field recording. The town of Hawthorne, Washington, was known for two things: apples and silence. Rows of orchards stretched for miles in every direction, broken only by the occasional barn or irrigation tower. For most of the year, the town slept under a blanket of fog rolling off the Puget Sound, and nothing disturbed the calm except harvest season. But in late September, one incident shattered Hawthorne's quiet reputation forever. The victim was Lydia Walsh, a 38-year-old acoustic field engineer hired by the state to document environmental noise levels across rural farmlands. Her job involved setting up small recording units, leaving them overnight, and collecting the data in the morning. Lydia was methodical, introverted, and known for taking detailed notes. Her colleagues trusted her reports more than any algorithm the state had ever used. On the evening of September 23rd, Lydia drove her pickup truck to Orchard Field 7B, an isolated stretch of land bordered by dense fir trees on its north side. The sun had already dropped, and the fog was beginning to roll in, giving the orchard an otherworldly haze. She parked near the equipment shed, unloaded her recording cases, and walked down the narrow dirt lane between the rows of apple trees. Her last communication to the office, sent at 7:42 p.m., read: setting up final array, everything normal. Everything after that was anything but normal. The next morning, when Lydia failed to check in, supervisors dispatched a small search team. They found her truck parked exactly where she left it, keys still in the ignition, thermos still warm. Her equipment cases were laid neatly on the ground outside the shed, indicating she had begun her work as usual. But Lydia herself was not there, and the orchard was unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, no distant highway hum. Silence, thick and absolute, hung over the entire field. The searchers eventually found her first audio recorder still strapped to a tree trunk near the north fence line. It was intact and still recording. When they played the file, hoping for a clue, they instead heard something that made the lead investigator recoil as though struck. The recording captured 8 minutes of normal orchard ambience. Then the timestamp hit 20:09:17. At that second, every sound stopped. Every single frequency, high, low, natural, mechanical, flatlined. The recorder didn't malfunction. Its internal systems showed no errors. The orchard simply went silent, in a way no natural environment ever does. What followed was not noise, but a presence. A faint rhythmic pulse entered the recording, soft at first, almost like a heartbeat filtered through thick walls. But as the minutes passed, the pulse grew sharper, metallic, mathematical, structured. Frequencies layered upon one another with unnatural precision, forming harmonics so pure they seemed engineered rather than organic. At 20:11:06, Lydia's voice entered the recording. She whispered, "Is someone there?" Her breathing was fast but quiet, like someone trying not to make a sound. She muttered to herself about a light, something she saw through the fog, something hovering just above the orchard floor. Searchers played the clip repeatedly, isolating frequencies to determine if she was hallucinating or genuinely observing something physical. Then came the moment that changed the investigation entirely. At 20:11:49, a dragging sound entered the recording. Not footsteps, not an animal, something broader like a large piece of fabric gliding across grass. Lydia gasped softly. "It's moving sideways. No, no, it's moving around me." The search team swore they heard multiple faint clicks, almost like camera shutters, but far too fast, too synchronized. Then the tone shifted again, rising higher and higher, pushing the recorder's microphone to its limit. And then Lydia screamed. Not a scream of fear, rather a startled, breathless reaction, as if something had grabbed her mid-sentence. The recording captured the struggle, boots scraping against soil, her breath accelerating, the microphone rattling as though something passed directly in front of it. She managed to shout only 2 words, "It's pulling." The rest of her sentence was swallowed by a surge of energy that spiked across the entire frequency spectrum. Analysts described it as a broadband burst unlike any known acoustic event. The waveform resembled a tall, perfect rectangle, something not possible in the natural world. After that burst, silence returned. The recorder continued running for another 47 minutes, but Lydia's voice never returned. The search expanded, covering acres of orchard land, but they found only one more clue: her second recorder, lying on the ground 50 meters away from where the first was found. Its casing was warped, as if exposed to intense heat, but the grass beneath it showed no burn marks. When investigators extracted the internal flash files, they found a single audio clip, not ambient noise, not environmental data, but an unintelligible sequence of tones and pulses that repeated exactly 3 times before terminating. Engineers attempted to reverse, slow, compress, and filter the audio, searching for patterns. What they found was the same chilling structure, a tri-layered signature. Perfect symmetry. No drift. No human interference possible. One scientist, after analyzing the harmonic intervals, muttered, "This looks like a scan." The government seized the equipment within hours. Lydia was declared missing. Her case file was sealed. Her last known location, the quiet orchard, was fenced off under the pretext of soil contamination. But locals say they still hear something at night if the fog is thick enough. A rhythmic pulse drifting between the apple trees, as though the orchard itself remembers what took her. And every so often, a hiker or farmhand reports seeing a faint white shimmer between the rows, never bright, never solid, but unmistakably present. Waiting. Listening, searching for its next target. The storm shelter disappearance. In the small prairie town of Dawson Ridge, Kansas, storm shelters were a way of life. Tornado sirens, violent winds, and sudden blackouts were part of the rhythm of the plains, and every family had a reinforced underground shelter stocked with water, canned food, and blankets. No one questioned this routine, until the night the Parker family vanished underground without leaving so much as a single footprint behind. On May 2nd, an unstable storm system moved across western Kansas, producing rapid wind shears and unpredictable lightning strikes. The sky turned a deep greenish-gray just after sunset, and the townsfolk knew what that meant. The sirens wailed across the open fields, echoing off grain silos and lonely barns. Families rushed into basements, cellars, and shelters. At 8:17 p.m., John Parker, his wife Melissa, and their 12-year-old son Andrew entered their storm shelter, a heavy steel door built into the ground beside their farmhouse. The neighbors saw them climb down the steps. John even waved before closing the door. This was the last time anyone saw the Parkers alive. The storm moved overhead rapidly. Lightning arced across the sky like veins of molten silver. Rain hammered the ground so hard that visibility fell to 0. The winds were powerful but not catastrophic, certainly not enough to damage the reinforced metal shelter. At 9:02 p.m., the sirens stopped. By 9:20, the storm had blown east. Neighbors began emerging, checking their yards, their roofs, their livestock. But the Parkers did not reappear. At 10:05 p.m., their closest neighbor, Linda Marsh, walked toward the Parker property with a lantern. She called out their names while tapping on the shelter hatch. No answer. She tried to lift the door, expecting the Parkers to push back from below. Instead, the hinges creaked open effortlessly. The shelter wasn't locked. The door wasn't jammed. There was no debris blocking it. The shelter was simply empty. The lantern light flickered down the stairs, illuminating the inside. 3 chairs, 2 blankets, a portable radio, a battery lantern still glowing softly, but no people. And here is where the mystery deepened. The floor of the shelter was spotless. No mud, no water, no storm debris, not even footprints, despite all 3 Parkers having walked in during heavy rain. It was as though the family had never entered at all. Linda backed away, heart pounding. She ran to her truck and called the sheriff. Within half an hour, the property swarmed with deputies, volunteer firefighters, and bewildered neighbors. The storm shelter was examined repeatedly. There were no signs of forced entry, no disturbances in the soil around the hatch, no footprints leading away, nothing. Deputies searched the farmhouse, hoping the family had returned inside. The front door was locked from the outside. The lights were off. Dinner plates were still on the table. Andrew's school backpack sat by the couch. Everything was untouched. At midnight, Sheriff Dalton made the decision to send 2 deputies into the storm shelter with a full forensic kit. What they found turned the investigation upside down. The walls of the shelter, plain steel panels bolted tightly since installation, were lined with a thin layer of condensation. But it wasn't normal moisture. The droplets were arranged in perfectly spaced intervals, like a pattern, as though something had vibrated the metal surface with immense precision. The forensic tech leaned in with a magnifier and whispered, "This isn't water, it's metallic." The residue shimmered faintly, almost microscopic, containing elements not typically found in storm shelters or soil in Kansas. Samples were collected and sealed immediately. At 1:43 a.m., a deputy inspecting the ceiling made a chilling discovery. A circular burn mark, no larger than a coin, perfectly centered above the 3 chairs. The metal was discolored, warped inward as if exposed to intense heat. Yet none of the chairs, blankets, or objects beneath it were damaged in any way. When investigators reviewed the portable radio's internal recorder, a feature rarely used, they found a final transmission at 8:23 p.m., just 6 minutes after the Parkers had entered the shelter. A soft hum, a rising tone, a crackle of static. Then Melissa's voice. "John, what is that?" More static, a metallic click. Andrew whispering, "It's glowing." Then the hum intensified, creating a harmonic wave so powerful that the microphone nearly blew out. The last second of the recording captured something that analysts later described as a cascading fold, a sound pattern resembling space itself bending inward. And then silence, perfect silence. After that timestamp, the radio continued recording for 41 more minutes. No screams, no movement, nothing. By dawn, the FBI had taken over the investigation. By noon, federal vehicles surrounded the Parker property. By sunset, the entire area was declared restricted. The official explanation released a week later: the Parker family perished during the severe storm. Remains were not recoverable due to flooding and structural collapse in the shelter. But the people of Dawson Ridge knew better. The shelter had not collapsed. There had been no flooding, and 3 people do not simply evaporate inside a steel room. Locals now call the property the Quiet Plot. They say that on stormy nights, if you stand near the shelter and listen closely, you can hear it, the same rising harmonic hum that the Parkers heard, soft at first, then stronger, then close, far too close. Whatever took the Parker family did not come from the storm above. It came from inside the silence below. The Canyon Ridge surveillance tape. The federal government closed Canyon Ridge Observatory in Arizona back in 1999. After budget cuts and equipment failures made continued operation unnecessary. At least, that was the public explanation. Privately, the observatory continued to be used by several intelligence agencies as a remote surveillance outpost. Its telescopes no longer scanned stars. They monitored airspace, electromagnetic anomalies, and transient signals that didn't have names. Only a handful of operators knew the truth. One of them was Elliot Granger, a 46-year-old technician with top-level clearance and a spotless service record. Elliot worked alone on the night shift, reviewing data streams and maintaining the aging power infrastructure that fed the compound. He was quiet, punctual, impossible to fluster. His last shift began at 11 p.m. on October 12th, and according to logs, it proceeded normally until 1:47 a.m. That was when the surveillance cameras captured something no one could explain. Camera 12, the one mounted on the northern ridge, picked up a faint flicker of movement along the canyon floor. It resembled a person holding a light, but the glow did not match any known lamp type. It was too cold, too stable, too perfectly vertical. Elliot zoomed the camera manually. The light wasn't being held. It was hovering. A pillar of pale blue luminosity, about 9 feet tall, drifting slowly between the scattered rocks. The canyon wind, a constant, relentless force, did not affect it. Elliot immediately initiated the Level 2 anomaly procedure, activating high-resolution recording mode. Logs show him muttering, "There shouldn't be anything out here, nothing should be moving." But the pillar continued sliding across the canyon floor, smoothly, deliberately, like it was searching. Then it stopped and raised itself. The footage showed the pillar elongating upward, thinning into a line, and then blooming outward into a circular shape, almost like an opening, a window, or a target. Patterns of faint symbols began appearing along its perimeter, rotating slowly like gears locking into position. Elliot leaned closer to the monitor. "Is this a projection? A drone? What is this?" The observatory vibrated, just slightly, but enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Camera 12 began to glitch, wavering between frames. Elliot switched to thermal imaging, but the screen filled with impossible readings. Heat spikes colder than the surrounding air, geometric voids that made no physical sense. Then at 1:49 a.m., something stepped out of the circle. Not walked, stepped out, as if the circle were a doorway. The shape was tall, thin, humanoid only in outline. Its edges rippled like fabric underwater. As it moved, its joints bent at angles that defied biological structure, and each step left a faint distortion in the ground, tiny spirals of dust rising upward. Elliot whispered, barely audible on the microphone, "This is not human." The figure moved toward the canyon wall, paused, and seemed to listen. Not with ears, its head tilted as if sensing frequencies carried in the wind. Then, without warning, every sensor in the observatory went offline. Infrared, dead. Magnetic monitors, flatlined. Acoustic sensors, zero input. Wi-Fi, radio, thermal, geophones, all silent. The observatory dropped into a state of unnatural quiet, the kind where even one's heartbeat feels too loud. Elliot stood, unsure if he should evacuate or investigate manually. For 30 seconds, the footage was blank due to system resets. When the feeds returned, the figure was gone. But something else had changed. The circular opening now hovered directly above the canyon ridge, 30 feet in the air and expanding. Slow, deliberate, like a giant iris widening. Filaments of light stretched from its edges to the rocks below, anchoring themselves like roots. Elliot grabbed the emergency broadcast phone. "Command, this is Canyon Ridge. I have an unidentified, listen, I have something expanding over the north ridge. This is not a drone. I need immediate." A harmonic tone cut through the room, vibrating the air. The phone went silent. The lights dimmed. Monitors flickered. Then the tone increased, climbing in frequency, resonating with the walls, the floor, the equipment, everything it touched. Elliot clutched his chest. His breath caught. He backed away from the control console as the tone shifted again, becoming modulated, structured, almost like language, except no human could speak in that pitch range. Camera 3, the one pointed directly at the observatory's entrance, showed the impossible next. A column of blue-white energy descended from above, touching the ground with absolute precision. Dust spiraled upward in response, forming a helix. The column pulsed once, and Elliot froze, not metaphorically, literally. His motion stopped mid-step. His breathing halted. His eyelids did not blink. The column wrapped around him, lifting him slowly, gently, like a marionette pulled by invisible threads. Camera 3 kept recording. Elliot rose toward the ceiling, then angled sideways, passing through the metal wall as though it were made of vapor. No hole, no burn marks, no structural damage. He simply phased out of existence. The energy column retracted upward. The frequencies abruptly ceased. All equipment rebooted simultaneously. By the time federal teams arrived 3 hours later, the observatory was cold and silent. Every camera replayed only the parts authorities allowed technicians to see. Elliot Granger was never found, but the strangest detail wasn't his disappearance. It was this. On the canyon floor, directly below camera 12 viewpoint, investigators discovered an imprint, a perfect circle 47 feet wide, scorched into the stone. Inside it, the rock had melted and cooled into a smooth, glass-like surface. But the circle wasn't the frightening part. The frightening part was the second imprint, a smaller circle, 10 feet wide, halfway embedded into the first one, as if something had descended, lowered itself, and then taken off again, leaving behind only its geometric shadow. The official statement claimed equipment malfunction led to fabricated imagery. But every technician who reviewed the source files whispered the same thing afterward. The cameras didn't malfunction. The world did. The Glacier Motel countdown. The Glacier Motel in northern Wyoming had once been a thriving rest stop for truckers, hikers, and tourists on their way to Yellowstone. By 2018, it was barely alive. 3 functioning rooms, a flickering neon sign, and a manager who kept the place running mostly out of stubbornness. Nobody wanted to stay there unless they had no other choice. On January 4th, 4 guests checked in during a late-night blizzard. Their names were logged in the motel register. Alan Pierce, 55, traveling salesman Nina Holloway, 29, wildlife photographer Tim Carter, 42, truck driver Eva Morneau, 33. Schoolteacher room assignments were given. Keys were handed over. The storm howled across the empty highway as each person carried their bags toward the creaking walkway outside their rooms. None of them would ever check out. At 11:08 p.m., the motel's ancient electrical system failed. Lights died. Heat cut out. The neon sign stuttered and went black. The manager, an elderly man named Ray Cooper, cursed under his breath and trudged to the maintenance shed to reset the breakers. That was the last time anyone saw Ray alive. The power never returned. By sunrise, all 4 guests were gone, and each room told a different story of what took them. Room 3, Alan Pierce Allen's room, was found in perfect order except for the alarm clock on the nightstand, which displayed a time that made no sense. 0000, blinking repeatedly as though performing a reset cycle. The clock was not digital. It was analog, a mechanical wind-up model, incapable of flashing numbers. Yet investigators logged it exactly as it was found, its hands missing, replaced by 2 red diodes soldered crudely into the metal faceplate. But no wiring existed inside the device. No battery, no source of power. Alan's suitcase was by the door. His shoes were on the mat. His coat hung neatly on the hook. But the bedspread showed a single, unmistakable indentation. Alan had been lying there, facing the ceiling, and then, according to forensics, lifted vertically with incredible force. The mattress fibers beneath the indentation were compressed into a spiral pattern, as though subjected to rotational pressure. And on the ceiling directly above the bed, investigators found a faint black circle, no larger than a coin, scorched into the plaster. A perfect match to the storm shelter incident 6 states away. Alan Pierce was never located. Room 4, Nina Holloway. Nina was a photographer, meticulous about her gear. Her camera bag was found open on the floor, lenses scattered, and her DSLR still recording when investigators picked it up. The final video contained static for the first 30 seconds. Then a countdown appeared. Not digital characters, handwritten numbers, as if someone had smeared glowing ink across the lens from the inside. 1098, each number pulsed with increasing brightness. Each pulse caused the audio to distort into a low, sweeping hum. By 6, the room lights flickered in the footage, despite the motel having no power. By 3, Nina's breathing became audible, rapid, terrified, close. At 2, she whispered, "It's in the walls." At 1, the hum reached a frequency that shook the camera. The lens warped inward, the picture collapsed. When the video ended, the camera's internal glass elements were found melted into a single fused block. Nina was never found. Room 5, Tim Carter. Tim was a large man, 240 pounds, ex-military, not easily frightened. But his room looked like a battlefield. Furniture overturned. The curtain rod snapped. Deep gouges in the floorboards as if Tim had been dragged toward the window. The strangest detail, the window glass had not shattered outward or inward. It had evaporated, leaving behind a perfect, crystalline outline of where it once sat. Outside in the snow, just beneath the window, investigators found a pattern burned into the ice, a 15-foot spiral carved with mathematical precision, edges so sharp they looked machine-cut. At its center lay Tim's truck keys, arranged deliberately in the exact geometric middle. But no footprints led away from the room. No tire tracks. No disturbance in the snow except the spiral. Tim Carter was never seen again. Room 6. Eva Morneau. Eva's room was the most disturbing of all. The door was still locked from the inside. The window sealed, the bathroom untouched. Her phone was on the bed, flashlight on. Her suitcase was unzipped but organized. And on the far wall, written in trembling strokes of charcoal taken from the room's fireplace, investigators found a message, "It's counting US." The letters were uneven, almost frantic, as though written in the last seconds of sanity. Beneath the message was a second line, smaller, barely legible. "Don't look at the 0." The investigators never publicly released that detail, but internal reports described a chilling final clue. Eva's phone contained a last audio recording, 2 minutes long. The first minute was silence. Then a faint ticking sound emerged, not mechanical, not rhythmic, more like a metronome made of metal and breath. Then a voice, Eva's voice, whispered, "It's here." After that, the ticking accelerated, faster, higher, shriller. Then it stopped. A single tone followed, long, steady, unbroken, and the recording ended abruptly at 0000. Eva was never found. The aftermath: when state police arrived, the blizzard had already covered most signs of movement around the motel. The manager's body was not recovered. The security cameras showed only static for the entirety of the night. But the final frame on one exterior camera, camera 2, captured something investigators refused to acknowledge. A tall column of light rising behind the motel, 12 feet wide, 40 feet tall, flickering in a deliberate sequence like a countdown. The official cause of death for the manager was listed as exposure. The guests were categorized as missing. The motel was condemned within 48 hours. No one ever stayed there again. But locals say that on winter nights, when the snowstorm clouds lift and the highway is empty, you can still see the Glacier Motel sign flicker faintly, not from electricity, but from something else pulsing behind the building, something that is still counting. The water treatment plant event, the Redwood Valley Water Treatment Facility, sat at the edge of Mendocino County, surrounded by dense forest, fog-draped hills, and a river system that served nearly 50,000 residents. It was a place built for routine pressure checks, filtration cycles, valve monitoring, and endless clipboard signatures. Nothing mysterious ever happened there, nothing unusual, nothing worth remembering, until the night the entire plant fell silent, and one of its senior technicians vanished during an event that federal investigators later described only as a non-terrestrial interference anomaly. His name was Mark Ellery, 43 years old, former Navy engineer, married, 2 children, reliable, calm, disciplined. On February 19th, Mark clocked in for a solo night shift at 10:02 p.m. The fog outside was dense, clinging to the concrete structures like a second skin. The river was high from recent storms, and runoff pounded against the intake grates far below the station. Mark performed his usual rounds, tank inspections, pump diagnostics, sensor readings, all logged with practiced precision. At 12:14 a.m., he walked into the control room. Cameras recorded him setting down his thermos, adjusting the monitor brightness, and tapping into the live flow charts. Then everything changed. 01:03 a.m. The pressure spiked. The first anomaly appeared as a sudden spike in incoming pressure, something physically impossible given the river's stable level. Alarms flashed across all screens simultaneously. The intake gauge shot from 18 psi to 87 psi in less than half a second. Mark frowned. That can't be right. He lifted the phone to call the on-call supervisor. The phone emitted no dial tone, only a soft, airy hum like wind passing through metal pipes. He hung up. The hum continued from the handset even after it was placed back on its cradle. Mark stared at it for a full 8 seconds before muttering, "Nope, that's not normal." Then the lights flickered. 01:04 a.m. The grid failure. All power inside the plant went out at once. Backup generators should have activated instantly, but they didn't. The entire facility fell into absolute darkness. Only one thing created light now: the river. Outside the control room's windows, where the darkness should have been total, a faint blue shimmer rippled across the water. Not moonlight, not reflection. A glow coming from beneath the surface. Mark stepped closer, pressing his face to the glass. The river was illuminating itself. A slow-moving sheet of pale blue radiance traveled upstream, against the current, gliding like a living membrane under the water. As it passed beneath the intake structure, the concrete shuddered. Mark staggered backward. What the hell is under there? Then came the sound, low, vibrational, alive. It wasn't a hum. It wasn't a tremor. It was the sensation of standing inside a speaker turned to maximum volume, except the sound wasn't heard through the ears. It resonated inside the bones. Mark grabbed a flashlight and sprinted into the main filtration hall. 01:06 a.m. The rising pulse. The flashlight beam cut across the metal catwalks. Steam vents hissed. Loose chains rattled. Every surface vibrated with the same rhythmic pulse coming from the river. Mark leaned over the railing to inspect the primary tanks. He froze. The water inside the tanks had risen with no inflow. Not only risen, but rotating. A perfect spiral vortex formed in every tank simultaneously, spinning in sync with the pulses coming from the river. The flashlight beam bent strangely around the spirals, warping as though passing through a lens. Mark whispered, "This isn't a mechanical fault, this is coordinated." Then the spirals stopped, instantly, without deceleration, frozen in impossible stillness, and the facility fell silent. No vibration, no water movement, no sound at all. The sudden silence was so complete that Mark's breath echoed off the walls like he was inside an enormous cathedral. He backed away slowly. Then he heard footsteps. 01:07 a.m. The footsteps not his own, these came from the walkway above him. Slow, measured, too heavy to be human. Mark shined the flashlight upward. No one there. Another step, another, getting closer. He climbed the ladder to the upper walkway. The beam flicked left, right, nothing. But the catwalk rail was warm. Metal shouldn't be warm in a blackout inside a winter facility. Mark touched it and yanked his hand back. The metal thrummed like a living artery. Footsteps again, this time behind him. He spun around and his flashlight went out. 01:08 a.m. The vertical light, a pillar of white-blue radiance, erupted from the center of the filtration hall, stretching from the concrete floor to the ceiling, not burning, not flashing, just existing with absolute authority. Everything inside it floated: dust, droplets, loose bolts, paperwork, pages rising gently as if caught in a slow upward wind. Mark couldn't move. His body stiffened, breath caught in his throat, heart pounding. The beam didn't emit heat or cold, only pressure, like standing against an ocean current. Then something moved inside the beam. A silhouette, humanoid, but elongated, stretched, its proportions subtly wrong, limbs too long, torso too narrow, head too smooth. It stepped forward, not out of the beam, through it. The form was simultaneously visible and transparent, like its body flickered between physical states. Every footstep produced a faint harmonic resonance that vibrated the metal catwalk under Mark's boots. He tried to back away, but his muscles wouldn't obey. The figure stopped inches from him. It raised one arm, impossibly thin, ending in a shape neither hand nor tool nor appendage, and pointed toward Mark's chest. The vibration from the river surged, and Mark lifted off the ground. His body floated horizontally, frozen, arms at his sides, eyes wide in terror. Tools, papers, chains, all lifted with him into the beam's gravitational pull. The figure watched him, studying, measuring, selecting. Then it moved closer until its head aligned with Mark's. The resonance spiked. A burst of light consumed the walkway, and Mark vanished. Not exploded, not burned, not pulled away, just disintegrated into a rising stream of particles that spiraled into the vertical beam like smoke drawn into a vacuum. The light retracted upward through the ceiling. Water crashed back into the tanks. Lights flickered on. The river stopped glowing. Everything returned to normal. Except Mark. The investigation. When the morning shift arrived, the facility was operational but empty. Mark's thermos was still warm. His jacket hung neatly on the hook. His clipboard lay on the console, pen uncapped. Security footage for the entire night was corrupted, overwritten by a single repeating frame, a blank screen displaying 010800 system restart. The federal investigation team quarantined the plant for 3 weeks. They removed samples from the tanks. They scanned the pipes. They studied the burned circular scar left on the catwalk. Their final report listed Mark Ellery as absconded during equipment malfunction. But an internal note found months later, declassified only by mistake, revealed the truth. Subject absorbed by vertical event pattern. Pattern match. 92% similarity to Yellowstone incident, Glacier Motel incident, Orchard Field event. Cause unknown. Origin non-terrestrial. The Redwood Valley Water Treatment Facility reopened after minor repairs. But workers swear that sometimes, just before dawn, the water inside the filtration tanks begins to spiral, slowly, silently, just like the night Mark was taken. As if something is still underneath the river, waiting for its next measurement. If you've made it this far, you already know something most people will never believe. You've heard the disappearances. You've followed the trails that stop mid-footstep. You've listened to the recordings that shouldn't exist, and watched ordinary people vanish into places no map has ever shown. These aren't isolated events. They're signals, pieces of a pattern stretching across forests, deserts, motels, laboratories, and forgotten highways. Every story is a thread, and every thread leads to the same silent question: who is taking them, and why now? The agencies deny everything. The reports get buried. The witnesses disappear. The evidence melts, burns, flickers, resets to zero, but the patterns keep forming. A light in the canyon, a countdown in a motel room, footsteps in an empty hangar, a storm shelter that becomes a doorway. A scientist pulled out of reality like she was never meant to stay here. If these are coordinated, if these are rehearsals, then what comes next won't be quiet. It won't be small. And it won't be contained. This channel exists because someone has to archive what's left behind. Someone has to piece together the moments before the lights fall, before the hum begins, before the world around you folds and turns inside out. If you want to understand what's happening, if you want to be one of the few people who sees the pattern forming before it reaches your town, your street, your room, then don't just watch. Subscribe. Stay here. Follow every signal. Because the events are accelerating. The distances between them are shrinking. And sooner or later, one of these stories won't be a story from somewhere else. It'll be one that begins exactly where you're standing now. So stay with us. Watch the next file. Listen closely. And whatever you do, don't look away when the light starts to rise.